factories, the newest employee gets thrown in a sanding department. What's so critical about that is the foundation to color.
I know.
You know that.
Well, and that's why I think it's so important to have these conversations, because in my opinion, they're lacking. We're all talking about finishes, spray guns, and things like that, but we're not really talking about sandpaper and the why and the how and the no. So on that note, let's transition into, okay, so foam back abrasives. What are the applications and what are we looking at for those things to help, save time, and what should we be using in, let's just say, let's kind of break it up. Let's do a whitewood application, a refinish, and maybe MDF. Just kind of go through those, like show us some products that you would recommend to use for those different applications.
Over the years, I have found our foam everywhere. We're sanding hockey sticks with them today. It's just amazing. In Tijuana, Mexico, hockey sticks. Then it went to China. But in the very beginning, I started out with the 5mm foam. We have always worked with a lot of OEM big door manufacturers, kitchen cabinet door manufacturers. This here is a 5-piece door, and I don't know if you can see the molding in that miter.
Yep.
So the molding in this miter, where the stile meets the rail, in a lot of these big manufacturers, they have manicure areas. And if you can kind of equate that to like when a lady or somebody goes in to get a manicure on their fingers, there's a lot of attention to detail, and it's a one-on-one type of thing. When I would go into these facilities, decorative specialties, as an example, Elk Grove, Northern California, Jason Albright. I go into these places, there would be ladies, 10, 15 ladies there that have these doors that are truing up the offset and the stile and the rail. And they're trying to sand these corners, these miters, without crossover scratch.
Oh, yeah, that's a nightmare.
Without changing lines,
right?
Without changing profiles.
Yeah.
And it would take them minutes to do.
Sure.
We took the 5mm foam on the 3x4 sander, and what was minutes in one of these corners, Eric, became 5 seconds. Revolutionized. They no longer had to hold the sandpaper with their skin. They could take a tool and let it float and guide it and float it. And then all of a sudden, the stile and the rail, just a beautiful blend.
Yeah.
So in whitewood sanding, those were some of the areas. Edge break. You know as well as I do that if you have a razor sharp edge, right, on a brand new, a door as an example, or any item that you're sanding, if you try to apply stain to that and it's a razor sharp edge, you don't have the retention,
right,
the holding power, because there's no surface tension.
Yeah.
So people began rotating the tool very quickly. Boom, boom. They would do all the sides to get that slight edge break. So that would solve a tremendous amount of problems. We would do the 5mm foam. Some people like the 10mm foam. Okay. When we get into, let's say, a shaker door, an MDF door, and in this case here, this is paint grade maple with an MDF center panel. A lot of times when you route that center panel out, you'll get a lot of fuzz. What our team has always done when we would come to somebody that's a finishing contractor that's spraying, we don't want you to send gallons of primer out with the product. We want you to send the least amount of product out with the item to keep your material costs down. So in a case like that, we move away from the foam and we take a pad saver and we place that on the backup pad and we put a 320 grit film on here so that we then go in and polish all of that fiberize or all of that fuzz. If we can polish that surface almost like a skin, when you shoot primer on it, it's not going to soak and just bury itself into the panel.
Right.
Once that's done, we then move away from the film and we go to the 5mm foam, and it's, say, a grit 220, which is a fine, and we scuff sand all those doors. So we can jump off the frame into the center panel, and we can do all of those areas, do the edges of the door, flip it over, do the same thing. And then, of course, different doors have different profiles. So we've got to kind of, we got to be flexible. We got to be able to be, we got to change gears to suit those profiles. But that's how we would attack that. For the refinish market, if you have a finished door, correct me if I'm wrong, but what you're after is a mechanical bond. Right. What happens if you don't have that mechanical bond?
Coming off.
It's coming off. Right? And that's a phone call you don't want to take, and that's a visit you don't want to have to make. So
absolutely.
This is kind of what the guy in England did that I didn't understand years prior. He wanted a mechanical bond, and he's like thinking, how do I take these, forgive me, ugly oak doors,
right,
and how do I get them all prepped so that I have that mechanical bond? And that's where the 1/2-inch foam on the 3x4 with the flexibility, you can wad that up in your hand. I can rub this in my hand and not lose grain because of the way it's bonded and the hot melt into the foam. But then we're able to take a product like that, and you've seen it all over the different sites and everything.
Sure.
People using the product on all those different profiles. Hey, I was in North Carolina, Eric, and I went into a contract finishing shop, and I was with a distributor rep, and this fella says, his name was Bryce. He says, hey, Skylar, I got this shop here, man, and I've never been able to get their sandpaper. They use all 9x11 sheets. They use all these hand sanding, like 2-sided pads and all that. And he's like, this lady's, she and her husband, they're tough. And I said, let's go. So we go in there, Eric, and this lady comes up. And actually, before we got there, Bryce called her on the phone, and he said, hey, Susan, we're in the parking lot. I got Surfprep with me. We're coming in. And she says, you know what, Bryce, I thought about this. We're not interested. I know that you sell us some other items. I'm sorry. We're not interested in seeing this whatever you got going on surfing. And he said,
that's funny.
Susan, he goes, this guy, Skylar, flew all the way from California to come show you this. No, he did not, Bryce. He's probably going to all these other accounts with you, and you just want to stop by here. She was a firecracker.
Yeah.
She's like, come on in, because she was busy.
Yeah.
She had 15 women sitting there. All their fingertips were taped with that blue flexible tape, that cotton tape.
Yeah.
Because they're hand sanding, right? I walk in with this, and she's like, oh, no. I just said, Susan, do you believe that, what you're doing here, there's a tremendous amount of labor in this? She's like, yes, it is. And you're taking all that time away right now. She looked me in the eye and she goes, okay, look, do you believe in this? And I said, yes, ma'am, I do. She said, Ricky, go get a butt foot right now for that chair. Get 2 of them. I'm like, okay. She comes over. She gives me the butt foot, Eric. She goes, you're going to do a standoff with me right now. I'm like, oh, my God. No, I don't want to do this. Eric, I had never sanded a butt foot. I'd never done it. I started sweating down the back of my center of my back, and my back was getting wet. She goes, nice. You're going to do it? She goes, Ricky, turn on your timer right now. She said, Skylar, if you sand that whole butt foot, you don't burn through that finish, and if you beat me, she said, I'm going to get a sander for every one of these women. Eric, I've never been more afraid in my life. I'm telling you, dude, she's like about 5'2". She weighed 100 pounds, but I felt like she was a bulldozer just going to drill me.
Yeah.
The clock started. I just did whatever I could do. She took the butt foot in her hand and threw it across the shop.
Wow.
The one she was sanding. She ripped this out of my hand, and she's like, just started sanding them. And she's like, oh my God. All the women were like going, no more tape on my fingers. If I got one story like that, Eric, we could probably have coffee and, I don't know, maybe in a couple of 3 months, we can talk more about that.
Yeah.
But that's another one, brother, where, I'm a grown man. Inside, I'm like crying. But what we find for hanging finishing lines, where doors are on a hanging line or furniture parts, a lot of people like the 10 millimeter because it gets the sander up out of the center panel away from the frame.
Gotcha.
So there's reasons why this stuff will do 40 doors compared to a sheet of sandpaper doing maybe 2 or 3. And by the way, Eric, when I'm in these shops, that doesn't mean that these products are bad.
Sure.
And I tell people, because as a consumer, and you're taking your hard-earned profits, you're buying products that you need to do your craft, to do your thing. And if somebody says, hey, Eric, that spray gun you got there, that's a piece of junk. But in your mind, you're thinking, man, I did some due diligence on that. I researched that, and it kind of fits my hand nice. I like the atomization. I like how it feels, So I always make sure people know that, just because you've been buying this at the DIY, it doesn't mean it's bad or inferior. Right. It's just that we worked really hard to create something that would help you. And something else that's, that's important to understand is we have these different interface pads. So this here is the 1/2 inch, kind of a flexible foam.
Uh-huh.
This is a more rigid 15 millimeter. This is a 7 millimeter. Here, thin. And then, of course, we have the pad saver. We have these different pads for different reasons. You may, I don't know if you've yet seen this yourself, you may have, but this here is what, the backup pad looks on an air sander. That's what it looks like. And that, of course, is what it looks like there.
Right.
Here's the backup pad with an interface pad on it with a piece of film on it.
Right.
So moldings, when moldings come off of shapers and they're cutting the profile in the molding, you got all these moldings, these long moldings, and a lot of times they have machine chatter in them.
Yeah.
How do people remove that machine chatter on a 10-foot long molding? How do they do that?
I've always done it with my hand in profiles. Exactly.
Right?
And you get the little, they make the little foam things and you can wrap the sandpaper around. And I've done the Bondo trick where you put the Bondo down in it and let it set. And then you put your sandpaper on it and then you sand it.
Yeah. So, and there's nothing wrong with any of that.
Sure.
But what we've done is we've cut the interface pad to the width of maybe whatever that profile is.
Okay.
And we travel the sander up and down, and it shaves all the peaks to the valleys to remove all the machine chatter. And now you're simply guiding a sander to do that.
Gotcha.
So we're saving time, we're saving skin, we're saving money. Important thing, I see this in a lot of online activity. I will see a lady take a furniture piece that let's say she wants to strip it to bare wood.
Mm-hmm.
And she's running a 5 millimeter foam in a medium grit, which is the equivalent of like a 120 grit.
Okay.
Foam pads, regardless of their density, or the grit, will never shave or level cut. They were never designed to do that. They're designed to give you relief and forgiveness so that you can get through scuff sanding and could do all these tedious tasks.
Right.
With the newest employee. If you have somebody that comes into a production environment and they're being asked to scuff sand 50 doors, and if you can give them a tool, an electric tool or an air tool with an abrasive, the whole purpose behind them is that they're designed to follow the shapes and contours of different substrates. The foam has never been able to level sand or cut sand or shape through like for removing the material, like I was saying on that on a desk.
Right.
If a guy or a gal is restoring, doing a restoration thing, and they want to cut through all the way down to that cornerstone oak or that hard wood, I see a lot of people online. They're trying to do it with the foam. It won't do it. What you need to do is you need to have the pad saver and the film.
Gotcha.
So once you finish that desk or you finish that rocking chair or whatever that item is, you then can take all of this for your in-between coat sanding. We have people sanding spindles, stretches, between the front legs and the rear legs of a chair. We have a huge Amish community in northeastern Ohio where these guys are building hickory chairs, and you have the saddle cut out in the seat. And man, they're using actually, some of them use 3x4, some of them use 5-inch, some use 6-inch. That was another thing I wanted to share is a lot of people ask, well, what's the right tool for this job, or what's the right tool for this application?
Right.
When you're spraying, you have muscle memory. Your fingertips, your wrist, your forearm, your elbow, your upper arm, your shoulder, your upper body. You have all muscle memory. You could do it blindfolded, Eric. You can do it. It's just you've got it because you've done it. So if I see somebody doing something and they're effective in the way that they're doing it, I might say, hey, stay with that 5-inch sander. But if we grab a drawer box, and this was a huge thing for us, if you have a drawer box and these are all pre-sealed, right?
Yep.
At the factory, you can't take a round tool into, obviously, a
corner. Right.
Sure. So when drawer boxes became a big thing, we took the 3x4 with this brake, this ball swivel brake and this air hose, so that we could drop down into a 14-inch deep drawer box.
Right.
To scuff sand that whole thing and just let the tool float in there.
Cool.
And on in between coat sanding, that's where that 5mm foam does a phenomenal job. Then you can take the box out, and if for whatever reason you're doing the outside, you can do the same thing. But it would make sense to take a square tool into a corner.
Right.
So much of this I learned when I was on the road, Eric. It was just get into the shops and seeing firsthand what people were doing. But there's so many. I'm going to say that there's probably opportunities and applications that exist today that I'm yet not even aware of.
Sure.
Kind of gives you an idea of some of those different applications. I'm going to grab this chair real quick.
Okay.
So if you want to strip sand this down to raw wood, like I was saying, you can try it with the 5mm foam, but where you really want to go with this is to take the 1/2-inch interface pad, and I usually start with a finer grit before I jump in to a coarser grit to see the rate of cut and see how quickly I can remove material.
Right.
But I'll take this 1/2-inch foam. I'll just put the electric sander on there. That 1/2-inch foam with the sandpaper on there will drop down into this saddle area. It'll drop down into these profiles, and it'll strip sand, but it will not change your lines, and it will not take away from the profile or the shape, especially on these arms.
Which is important.
It's really important. So you can come in and you can remove all that material just as the sander float it, just float it. I tell people all the time, I share with them, sanding is an art like spraying is. It really is.
Yeah.
And it's something that you learn over time. We can then take this and we can drop this on a spindle and we can remove, like you see here, all the paint on that spindle, and we're not changing the integrity of that.
Absolutely.
What I wanted to say, because we're talking about the different applications like the foam and everything.
Yeah.
We went to this place. There was like 3 or 4 women, and all they were doing was sanding these 10-foot moldings. And I was at a loss. I didn't know how to solve that problem. I went back a month later, Eric. They had cut all the 10 millimeter foam into French fries.
Mm-hmm.
They took the French fry and they put one here, and one here, and they dropped it down into those channels in those routed areas, and they let the tool float the entire length.
Yeah.
Of that molding. You know, we have the dust extraction.
Yep.
I'm a huge advocate. I've been a huge advocate forever on pulling dust up from the substrate so that you're not grinding
it in. Yeah, absolutely.
You're finished. And then, masks. If you can be in the South with the humidity and not have to wear a mask, huge.
Yeah, absolutely.
Huge.
I just want to recap a couple things. Basically, if you're trying to strip something, then, a film back abrasive is probably the way to go with the interface pads, whether it be a half inch, you said 7 millimeter, 10 millimeter, and then the backup pad. And on that, just for a second, the backup pad. So what's so important about the backup pad? Why should we not just stick it to the back of the sand?
Having a backup pad there's about 25 different Velcros, if you will. There are 25 different hook systems. We have chosen 2. We have a very low profile hook that goes out on every sander that is in a box or a kit. And then we have a J hook. If you're a fisherman, that's what a J hook is. On a backup pad, it's just like a fish hook. These low profile hooks are like a lowercase r.
Okay.
With a little backflip on it. So that's kind of the difference. Anytime you add an interface pad to the tool, you're going to want to have the J hook backup pad on there, because if you don't, the lowercase r lets the interface pad, it can start to float on you and move as you're sanding.
Okay.
There's not enough hook in that lowercase r, where on a J hook, that fish hook latches deeply in there. So if, like we were talking about a little earlier, if we were removing machine chatter on moldings, you want that J hook to hold this smaller, narrower interface pad in place so that it doesn't float on you.
Okay.
So I went through a bunch of my stuff, and I'm going to show you some backup pads that I took off sanders that were actually being used.
Okay.
This is one of them here.
Gotcha.
Do you see that void at the top?
Yeah.
Right there.
Yeah.
That's a huge void. All the foam and everything got ripped out of that hook. That's going to definitely affect the outcome of your sanding if you have a huge hole in there.
Yeah.
Another thing is all of these are nylon hooks. They're all nylon hooks. And those nylon hooks, if you're standing up on an angle, you're not flat to the substrate, those nylon hooks get really hot and they melt. Once they're all melted around the circumference of the backup pad, you no longer have the ability for the pad to grab the loop on the back of your sandpaper. So people start to talk about, man, my sandpaper is getting torn up and ragged and ripped on the edges. That's another reason. Another thing that can happen is the edge of the backup pad can curl over.
Mm-hmm.
When that happens, this curl is more pronounced on the edge, and under the weight of the tool, you're driving that hard ring through the abrasive into your substrate, you're getting swirl marks.
There you go.
Those there are hook and loop backup pads. Here's a PSA backup pad. That's the sticky back. You can see where the edge is all beat up and torn and the black vinyl's gone.
Uh-huh.
This one. So what does that mean? It means that you always want to pay attention to your backup pad because it's going to make your abrasives act or react differently. That's going to transfer into your substrate. Once all this stuff gets sanded and whitewood sanding, it gets rolled on carts to finish. Everybody in finish starts screaming and yelling.
Yep. Well, and it also, like what you're talking about too, and this is something that I just, I haven't done a ton of one-piece MDF doors until this year. And I started noticing like track lines and things like that. And I started going, oh, wait a minute. It's because my backup pad's jacked up, or I'm putting the wrong kind of weight on the back of it because I'm used to a different type of substrate. So it's really important that guys realize that you really should be changing those out, because I know that mine's all beat up, and it can really affect, especially on like things like MDF. And I don't see it so much on some of the like hard maple when you're doing clear finishes, but when you get into dark stains, boy, you can really get into some trouble with that. But I mean, I've seen everybody's backup pads; they're all shredded, so we all really need to be changing those more often. And I'm glad you brought up the J hook thing, because I have had an issue with a pad that I've been using for MDF, and it's doing that very thing. It's wanting to slide over, and I'm like, why is this thing doing this? It's like, it's not, but that's the reason. So now I know.
Right. Yeah. So it's just a bunch of different, variables that come into play, and they end up rearing this huge issue at the end.